This is the final video in a series of 7 aimed to help you get an A star in your Women in Literature Unseen essay for OCR A-Level English Literature. The video will start by giving you the opportunity to complete a full practice unseen essay response, with the extract coming from George Eliot's 1860 novel The Mill on the Floss. I will then show you my response before analysing it in detail to demonstrate how it meets the requirements of the mark scheme. In the final section, you will get an opportunity to begin to consolidate some of the key quotations used throughout this series of 7 videos. Time now for your go at writing a full response to an unseen Women in Literature question. Remember that in the exam you have 1 hour and 15 minutes to do this. You've had quite enough waffle from me by now about what is required. Now the proof is in the pudding. In order to ensure the writing is not unhelpfully tiny, I have split the extract over 4 slides, which will appear within 5-second intervals. Press pause now and start writing your A-star response.
Now, there's the moment we've all been waiting for. Here's my full-length response on a full unseen Women in Literature question.
Before writing, I annotated the text as shown on screen. Did you do the same? And here's my response. In this extract, a young girl, Maggie, is keen to show off her passion and understanding for books to a non-family member of a higher class, Mr. Riley, under the proud yet slightly worried, watchful eye of her father. However, the comments and attitudes displayed by both men confirm the typical prejudices of the 19th century, in which girls and women were discouraged from engaging with vigorous intellectual pursuits, hence the existence of the disparaging term a blue stocking, meaning a woman who paid too much attention to scholarly ideas. The opening to the passage clearly shows the father's conflicted feelings in relation to his daughter. On the one hand, he obviously gets on well with her, his eye is twinkling as he looks in her direction, which implies that the pair share a light-hearted understanding, and is proud of her. There are parallels with Mr. Bennet's attitude towards his daughter Eliza in Pride and Prejudice, in his exaltation, his enormous pleasure at just how clever she is. However, on the other hand, unlike Mr. Bennet, he feels that such intelligence and quick understanding in a woman can be problematic. But it's bad, he says within a single sentence. The repetition of the simple adjective bad shows categorically that he knows that society does not condone what it views as unhelpfully excessive learning in a woman. Even worse, such learning and intelligence can potentially cause the woman future difficulties, hence his subsequent comment that it'll turn to trouble, I doubt. In this context, the verb doubt means to fear rather than the more modern meaning of not being certain about something. It is clear that such intelligence and deep passion for learning from his daughter is likely to impact upon her negatively, something deeply disturbing for modern readers. However, the Victorian period was a time in which a woman's education, at least for the middle classes, was important principally in terms of making her more attractive to a male suitor, and not for its own sake, or for the opportunities it might offer in terms of job prospects, as would be the case today. Caroline Bingley sums up the priorities well in Pride and Prejudice. A woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages. In other words, women needed to be educated to be even more decorative and safely tethered to the domestic sphere. Thus, within this period, there was no place for a girl, let alone one from a lower class, to be reading, let alone offering up subversive interpretations of unladylike texts such as Defoe's The History of the Devil. Hence Mr. Riley's admonishing of Mr. Tulliver at the end of the extract. Even within the mid to late 20th century, texts such as the bell jar indicate that a woman's education ultimately might not change her ultimate destiny as being unfulfilled bored queen of the domestic sphere. Buddy Willard's mother may have been a well-educated teacher, but she still ends up flattened out under the feet of her husband. What is particularly tragic in this extract is the fact that Maggie is obviously so passionate and enthusiastic about her reading and showing off her knowledge, yet she lives in a world where such passion will be checked and ultimately crushed. Following her father's suggestion that she understands books better than many adults, her cheeks began to flush with triumphant excitement, and she eagerly seizes a corner of a book to explain to Mr. Riley what the key ideas and images mean. The adjective triumphant indicates the enjoyment and importance of her understanding being acknowledged. Confirmation of her cleverness will feel like a victory to her. Meanwhile, the adverb eagerly shows just how quickly she wants to start the process of showing off her knowledge and her enthusiasm for this. And when she does start explaining the section of the book to Mr. Riley, it is clear that she hasn't just absorbed the information passively, like dreamy, excessively romantic Isabel Gilbert in The Doctor's Wife, but continues to assess and think vigorously for herself. Within long, breathless, fragmented sentences, which show both her excitement and knowledge, she points out the absurdity of the test used to determine whether a woman was a witch. But what good would it do her then, when she was drowned? Although it is unlikely that a majority of contemporary readers would have believed in the reliability of such a method for determining a woman's status as a witch, or indeed would have believed in witches altogether, Maggie's challenging of this historical misogynistic practice is subversive, given that women and girls were primarily encouraged to be sycophantically ornamental rather than thoughtful and analytical. Think of Blanche Ingram in Jane Eyre, or the wretchedly passive Elizabeth in Frankenstein. Indeed, given that within the same utterance she suggests that in a picture a blacksmith, a man, is the devil really, she comes uncomfortably close to expressing quasi-feminist sentiments likely to further disturb and unsettle the two listening men. Maggie, of course, is likely to have no idea that she is saying or doing something which might meet disapproval and censure. She uses a tag question, isn't it, which indicates her desire for her comments to meet approval, and excited rhetorical questions such as isn't he ugly, to show her genuine passion and interest in the image. When she talks about the devil, there is a sense of her getting carried away by her enthusiasm. Her voice becomes louder and more emphatic. Maggie has genuine conviction in her beliefs. She has thought deeply about the text and has the self-confidence to proclaim her views ardently to two male adults, albeit one of them her father. Nonetheless, in spite of such confidence, Maggie does not receive the additional praise she is seeking. Firstly, her father is described as having listened to her with petrifying wonder. This oxymoronic phrase confirms the gulf in education and intelligence between himself and his daughter. She is able to explore ideas and concepts which he has never considered or sought to understand previously, hence the noun wonder. However, the adjective petrifying shows his fear. As a father, he may want to marvel at his daughter's cleverness, but he recognizes that her exploration and interpretation of such serious, non-frivolous topics as witches and the devil, which he doesn't fully understand, is considered inappropriate for a woman, let alone a young girl. This is confirmed by Mr. Riley's subsequent declaration that Defoe's text is not quite the right book for a little girl. As the adjective right confirms, there are texts which society deems appropriate and harmless for young girls. Berwick's History of British Birds in Jane Eyre springs to mind, and those which should be kept for the men. However, Mr. Riley's question to Mr. Tulliver about how Defoe's text came amongst his books gives an insight into the gender roles of the time. First fathers and then husbands had a duty to protect and manage their female relatives and ensure that they were not exposed to inappropriate, corrupting influences. When men fail to control their female dependents, the consequences can potentially be disastrous. Mr. Bennet's lackadaisical attitude to Lydia's trip to Brighton nearly makes all of his daughters unmarriageable in Pride and Prejudice, whilst Mr. D'Urberville must also shoulder some of the blame for 16-year-old Tess's seduction at the uncompromising hands of Alec d'Urberville. Mr. Riley's muted reaction to a very intelligent, exuberant young girl's musings confirm his and society's inherent belief that girls' and women's interests need to be carefully channeled within prescribed, dull, domestic limits. Essentially, to quote an old maxim, women should be seen, but not too often heard. How does this response meet the criteria within the top band of the mark scheme? Well, let's take AO2 first. There needs to be well-developed and consistently detailed discussion of the effects of language, form and structure. Here I go into microscopic detail about the effects of the oxymoronic phrase petrifying wonder. Mr. Tulliver is in awe at his daughter and has only a dim idea of what she is saying. However, he is also frightened. In the world they inhabit, proper, morally decent girls and women simply do not propound theories about the devil and witches. How should we interpret excellent and consistently effective use of analytical methods? For me, this is your analysis of how the writer gets his or her ideas across. Within the section on screen, Eliot wants to get across the idea that Maggie is a dear, clever child whose wings are about to be cruelly clipped. She gets this idea across by showing her excitement and enthusiasm in adjectives such as triumphant and adverbs such as eagerly. Of course, at this level, it goes without saying that quotations need to be gloriously, succinctly embedded within virtually every sentence of your main paragraphs. Keep them as short as possible. Now for AO3, context. I cover this within my introduction with that reference to a blue stocking. And also here when talking about the education for women during the Victorian period. As well as here when talking about the fact that men had a duty to protect their female relatives from corrupting influences. To quote doddery idiot Mr. Woodhouse from Austen's Emma, women are delicate plants after all. However, note that references to the context need to be integrated fully within your argument and not tagged on separately or hopefully. And now AO1, in which you show the examiner that you have an excellent and consistently detailed understanding of the extract. One place I do this is within my opening sentence. No waffle, just get straight on with showing that you have understood the heart of the passage. But the question also wants you to relate your discussion to your reading concerning women in literature. I do this throughout, including here with my references to Jane Eyre and Frankenstein. The answer needs to be well structured with a coherent and consistently detailed argument. With the extract on screen, note how I have developed my argument to make a broader point about gender roles at the time. Mr. Riley's pompous question, "How came it among your books, Mr. Tulliver?" shows implicitly that men felt that they had a duty to censor and limit. And if they haven't done this for whatever reason, they themselves should be censured and suitably upbraided. Of course, you need to write well and engagingly. Make it interesting and lively for the examiner to read and mark. Show you care. Show you're interested. And finally, you need to use your critical concepts and terminology accurately and consistently, as I do here with my references to tag and rhetorical questions, oxymoron and noun. To conclude this epic video, I'd like to give you the opportunity to consolidate some of the juiciest quotations that I use. Here you can see some of the crackers on women and sex from Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Can you verbally fill in the gaps, either on your own or within the classroom? What can you remember? It's pause time. Tess had been stirred to confused surrender. Stupid old Angel Claire told Tess that she was one person and now another. Alec d'Urberville doesn't want Tess to tempt him with her charms. What about this classic from Jane Eyre? Can you identify the missing words? It's pause time. Women feel just as men feel. They suffer from too rigid a restraint, too absolute a stagnation. And it is nonsense to suggest that they should stick to making puddings and knitting stockings. What about these classics on women and marriage from the bell jar? Press pause. The man would have a lively, fascinating day, whilst the woman would be utterly exhausted after an entire day spent doing housework. Whilst getting married and having children was like being brainwashed. You would be as numb as a slave in some private totalitarian state. Now back to the bloody chamber. Can you identify the missing words? It's pause time. It is the unguessable country of marriage. And when you marry, you go into exile and will always be lonely. The mother wants to check that her daughter is sure she loves her prospective husband. She doesn't reply, but is sure that she wants to marry him. Now to the yellow wallpaper. Can you identify the missing words? Press pause to do so. John refers to his wife as little girl and cries out, "Bless her little heart." Meanwhile, the narrator reports that she lies down a great deal now, and her husband John says it is good for her. It isn't. Finally, back to the doctor's wife. What are the missing words? Press pause now. Women and Isabel make their lives easier by being good at pudding making and stocking darning. And Isabel would be nothing if she was not George Gilbert's wife, a nursery governess for ever and ever. This video is aimed to broaden your perspective and knowledge in relation to women in literature texts and provide you with some quotations to potentially weave into your exam essay. You've also had stacks of additional practice writing unseen essay responses, and I've shown you my own answers. I hope it's been helpful. Many thanks for watching Schofield on Shakespeare.